Anyway, Judy Garland got married at the age of 20 because she wanted to have a baby. And she married a guy named David Rose. And she became famous for The Wizard of Oz, of course, when she was 17 years old. And between 17 and 20, her film career was going off like a rocket. And everybody wanted the gravy train and all the money she was making to keep flowing. So when she became pregnant after her marriage, her mother, MGM Studios, and her husband all colluded against her and forced her to have an abortion. So they took her to a clinic, they cornered her in the car, and they escorted her in. And she said the minute she had the abortion, her marriage collapsed, that something was gone, and it was never the same. And she had developed, right after her abortion, anorexia. She dropped down to 94 pounds within 3 months of her abortion. And she had terrible sleep disturbances, and that's when she began her sleeping pill addiction. And a lot of people after abortion have nightmares and trouble sleeping, and they'll drug themselves. They'll stay out in a bar till 4 a.m. because they're afraid to go home and be assaulted by all these horrible images and nightmares. So that's a big problem in the post-abortive population. It sure was a problem for Judy. Anyway, so Judy ends up having what we call an anniversary reaction, and she became depressed as she approached her due date, which is not uncommon. And she developed what we call a pregnancy fantasy, which is a form of intrusion. Having fantasies is a form of intrusion because and some people don't fantasize about it, they act out, which is why the rates of pregnancy after abortion are so high, because people feel like they want to finish what they started. We call them atonement or replacement pregnancies. So anyway, Judy has this fantasy, and now she's with another guy, and his name is Joe forget his name. She's with another guy, and she tells him she's pregnant, and she begged him to leave his wife and marry her, or she would have to have an abortion. And of course, he wasn't about to leave his wife, and he took her, and what did she re-experience? Abandonment and betrayal. The thing about traumatic reenactments is that you repeat the same theme that accompanied the trauma. So if betrayal was a big part of what you experienced, you're going to find men that will love you and leave you very attractive. And the nice, wonderful, stable guy you consider boring, and there's no chemistry. The chemistry is driven by the trauma and the need to engage. I call them drama junkies, where they're always looking for crisis, and they'll go out shoplifting, or they'll engage in high-risk activities. They'll do everything dangerous because that gives them the high, which really is what's self-medicating depression. So there's like a whole bunch of dynamics that go on that are usually out of the person's control. They compulsively are out there trying to fill something, and it leads to crazy, crazy behavior. So anyway, Judy tells him that's on the anniversary. A year later, she's dating another guy, and she does the same thing in a pregnancy fantasy. And this new guy is Joe Mankiewicz, and his wife was mentally ill, and he said that she needed some counseling. You could see she was troubled. So she went to counseling, and she started saying things like, I'll live my own life and stop treating me like a child, and I'll do what I want, because she was trying to assert her autonomy when everybody was controlling her life. And nobody liked that none of MGM or her mom, they wanted to have their role in her abortion and all its grief and the anorexia and the sleeping pills and all the spiraling out of control. They didn't want to take responsibility. So they basically forced her to stop counseling, and they went screaming one day about God and the studio and motherhood, and it was this bizarre onslaught of accusations. Anyway, so Judy then tells Joe that she's pregnant again, and they go to New York City. She goes into an abortion clinic, and they gave her a pregnancy test. And there in the clinic, they came out and they said, you're not pregnant, because it was all fantasy. And she fell down in the clinic, holding her arms over her womb, rocking and crying hysterically. They had to carry her to the car. So she goes back to the scene of the crime, relives all the loss and pain. This is what a traumatic reenactment is. And there's lots of ways people can experience it. And then she ended up marrying Vincent Minnelli, who was a well-known effeminate homosexual. Perfect choice for someone who wants to keep re-experiencing abandonment and betrayal, eh? Well, that's Canadian. Anyway, so she does that, and after, but she did achieve one thing, pregnancy, which made her very happy. And one of the first things she said is, "I'm going to have a baby, Mama. Do you mind?" And then after Liza Minnelli was born, she had a terrible postpartum depression. She admitted to stage fright, which is really post-traumatic stress disorder, all that panic and anxiety when she looks upon her baby, and it connects her to memories of her aborted child, and then you don't want to be around the baby. And that happens to a lot of moms. That's why there's trouble bonding and nursing and everything else, because your child is a trigger to trauma. And so you want to get away from them. Or you decide you never want a child. Childless by choice is the slogan for that. So that's a little story there. And she begged the nursemaid not to leave her alone with the baby because of her stage fright, and the lady went out for a drive, and Judy smashed a mirror, took a shard of glass, and slit her neck. And she ended up in the psych ward of the hospital for many weeks. So another traumatic reenactment is that now she's separated from her child. These are all sort of, the symptoms might be happening, but who's connecting these things in mental health hospitals to abortion? In fact, most people, I know so many women who've been hospitalized every year on the anniversary week of their abortion. And they go in and they know what their problem is, and they're not allowed to talk about it. Oh, that's not your problem. And it's maddening. And people then act out kind of crazy.